So, hello everyone. Today, welcome to Babylon Tom. Today, we're going to make another one about the same subject, which is the subject of the Jesuits, and in light of the crimes that we've seen lately about the 215 kids that have been murdered in BC. So, I decided to talk about the Jesuits that are known as to be the Canadian martyrs, which were French Jesuits that were here during the New France era before the English came, and that those guys were canonized by the Pope, Pope Pius the XI, so the one that orchestrated the Second World War, and they are considered to be the patrons of Canada by the Catholic Church and by the Anglican Church, which is supposed to be a Protestant church, but it's not anymore. So, in starting, we're going to have a look at the Jesuit oath in order to understand what's a Jesuit. So I've decided to cut this out a little bit to make it shorter because it has several pages, and it's very lengthy. And so I think I already read it on one of my presentations. So I decided to just cut it to I think one of the most important parts of this oath. So the candidate of the fourth vow of the Jesuit, also known as the Knights of Columbus oath, goes as following: I declare and swear that the Holiness the Pope is Christ's regent and the true and only head of the Catholic and Universal Church through the earth. And by the virtue of the key of binding and loosing given to His Holiness by my Savior Jesus Christ, He has the power to depose heretical kings, princes, states, commonwealth, and government, and they may be safely destroyed. To do now denounce and disown any allegiance as due to any heretical king, prince, state, named Protestant or liberal. The word liberal here simply means libertarian. It's only that the meaning of the word has changed. Or obedience to any of their laws, magistrate, or officers, and other of the name of Protestants or Masons to be damnable. Now here it says that they're against the Masons, but as we're going to see later, the Jesuit has actually created the Masons. And the reason why it says that here is most likely because this is the fourth vow, and there's most likely a fifth vow, and eventually the candidate Jesuit knows that the Jesuits have created the Freemasons. And they themselves to be damned who will not forsake the same. I do further promise and declare that notwithstanding I am dispensed with to assume any religion heretical for the propagation of the Mother Church interests, to keep secret and private all her agents' counsel from time to time as they entrust me, and not to divulge directly or indirectly by word, writing, or circumstance whatsoever, but to execute all that should be proposed, giving in charge or discovered unto me by you, my ghostly father, or any of this sacred order. I do further promise and declare that I will have no opinion or will of my own, or any mental reservation whatsoever, even as a corpse or cadaver. Perinde ac cadaver. I do further promise and declare that I will, when opportunity presents, make wage relentless war, secretly or openly, against all heretics, Protestants, and Masons, as I am directed to do, to extirpate them from the face of the whole earth, and that I will spare neither age, sex, nor condition, and I will hang, burn, waste, boil, flay, strangle, bury alive these infamous heretics, rip up the stomach of the womb of their woman, and crush their infant's head against the wall in order to annihilate their execrable race. That when the same cannot be done openly, I will secretly use the poison cup and strangulation cord, and steel of the poniard, and the leaden bullet, regardless of the honor, rank, dignity, or authority of the person, whatsoever may be their condition in life, either public or private, as I at any time may be directed to do, so to do by any agents of the Pope Superior, the Brotherhood of the Holy Father of the Society of Jesus, which is another name for the Jesuits. So we see that they're not a Christian order at all. This is a satanic oath. This has nothing to do with Jesus Christ. Never in his life Jesus has recommended to kill anyone. So, yeah. So when we have a look at this oath, to me at least, the first person that comes to mind is John F. Kennedy, where we can see here at the right-hand side of the screen here, that was killed by gunshot in his Cadillac there a few minutes after this picture was taken. And of course, at the left-hand side, the upper corner, we can see drawings of John Wilkes Booth, who is about to kill President Abraham Lincoln at the Ford's Theater in Washington. In the image just below, we can see Abraham Lincoln on his deathbed as he died during the night when he was shot at the head. And in the picture, we can see there that the Americans back then, they drawn a man with a hidden hand in his coat, a symbol that we can see in the drawings here, that we know the significance because of the drawings and writings of William Morgan, a man that was a Mason and decided to expose them and suffer the consequence of his act according to the oath that he actually did when he joined the lodge. He did the various oaths in which he says that if he betrays the confidence and if he reveals the secrets of the lodge, he is going to be killed by the Masons. And of course, today it's considered to be a conspiracy theory, but the President John Quincy Adams wrote actually a book, wrote several letters in which he acknowledged the fact that the murder was acknowledged by the court to have been done by the lodge of the former lodge of William Morgan, and that the conspiracy included over 200 members of this lodge. Hear what Napoleon Bonaparte, the former emperor of France, said about the Jesuits. But before we read this quote, let's just analyze the picture down there. And we can see the famous picture of Napoleon where he has his hand in the coat, the signal of the hidden hand. We can see just on the right of Napoleon, Joseph Stalin was doing the same sign. We can see here at the right of Stalin, Adolf Hitler, who was actually put in power by the Catholic Church. At the complete right side of the picture, the various picture, we can see there Harry Truman, former President of the United States, with his Masonic apron. In the picture between Truman and Napoleon, we can see in the middle sitting there FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, former President of the United States during the Second World War, with his Masonic apron. Churchill was also a Freemason. And so, here is what Napoleon has to do about the Jesuit. Obviously, Napoleon was not acquainted to the fact that the Jesuit actually created the Masonic Lodge in which he was a member. The Jesuits are a military organization, not a religious order. Their chief is a general of an army, not a mere father abbot of a monastery. And their aim of this organization is power. Power in its most despotic exercise. Absolute power, universal power, power to control the world by the volition of a single man. We're talking about a pope here. Jesuitism is the most absolute despotism and at the same time the greatest and most enormous abuses. So we're talking about one of the largest despots who actually qualifies the Jesuit as being even terrible, more terrible than himself, which I agree. Here's what John Adams has to say about the reestablishment of the Jesuit order in 1814. I do not like the late resurrection of the Jesuits. If even any congregation of men would merit eternal perdition on earth and in hell, according to these historians who thought like Blaise Pascal, a true Catholic, it is the company of Loyola. Blaise Pascal was a famous French mathematician who was denouncing the Jesuits. When he did so, he took a pseudonym, Louis de Montalt, because he feared the consequences of the book that he wrote. And I have this book in French, and it's also available in English. I give the link here, the title of the book. Very lengthy and thick book that you can read several letters that he wrote on the subject. John Adams was the second president of the United States. Eugene Sue wrote this book, The Wandering Jew. The story of the book is actually a biblical interpretation of the word of Jesus, in which he writes a story based on the fact that there are Jews right now alive that have seen Christ crucified. And this is the story of that book. Now, the Catholic Church, when the book went out, because it was a biblical interpretation of the Bible, they deemed it heretical as a book, and they encouraged the clergy and the Catholics not to read the book. So here's what Eugene Sue had to say about the Jesuit. There is something still more to be dreaded than a Jesuit, and that is a Jesuits. Here's what Samuel B. Morse had to say about the Jesuits. Samuel B. Morse was the inventor of the Morse code. Samuel B. Morse was sent to Europe to spy on the Europeans, and he found out that the Jesuits, the empires there in Europe, headed by the Pope, had a plan to send an army of Jesuits, most likely Jesuit coadjutors, in the United States. And he had passed the rest of his life to denounce and prepare American to what was going on and what was about to come back then. Now, over 100 years, nearly 200 years later, we can see that this plan of the Pope has succeeded in the U.S., and the entry door for the United States to be invaded by the Jesuits was, to my opinion, the province of Quebec and Canada in general. The Jesuits are a secret society, a sort of Masonic order, with super added feature of revolting odiousness and 1,000 times more dangerous. Here's former Prime Minister of Canada, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, the father of Justin Trudeau, has to say about the Jesuits. The Jesuits were good educators, exceptional teachers. In an area and in a society where freedom of speech was not held in high regard, of course, that the discourse be focused on what they were teaching, but we were able to go beyond this framework without incurring too great a risk. In other words, the Jesuits, they have always stamped the foot on the freedom of speech. And we see the consequences on the bottom right picture that I've put there, where a Mohawk, because this is the flag of a Mohawk, a tribe of the native Canadians, what they have done to some statues that they deem to be backers, I guess, of the crime that happened there. So you see why there's never a consequence to the Catholic Church. The leader of our countries are Jesuit trained. So those Canadian martyrs started to come here in 1642 and were actually murdered in 1648-49. The name of those guys were Isaac Jogues, Antoine Daniel, Jean de Brébeuf, Gabriel Lallemand, Charles Garnier, Noël Chabanel, coadjutor René Goupil, and coadjutor Jean de Lalande. The Catholic Church tell us those facts. Now, Jean de Brébeuf has a high school name in Montreal for him, and Charles Garnier has also a high school here in Quebec, which is a Jesuit school named after him. On the picture there, we can see the 8 figures there, and there's a man wearing blue that's doing the skull and bones. Now the skull and bones is, we can see the sign there on the right, was established in 1773 by Adam Weishaupt, a Jesuit priest in Ingolstadt University in Germany. Now, this is also the sign of the pirates, and I have visited myself the American Virgin Island in the Caribbean, where I visited the fortress of Captain Morgan, which and the things that I've heard there as a story, and if you visit the museum there, the house where he lived with his pirate, those guys were absolute bloodthirsty criminals. They were killing for fun. They were stealers. The pirates, of course, they were boarding ships and stealing the ships. And those are bearing the sign of the skull and bones were most likely the Jesuit-led pirates, because there were many kinds of pirates during those days. Because you see, to finance this secret war, back then you didn't have any paper money, so they needed to steal the gold and the goods, and the pirates were doing it in the Caribbeans, where it was most easy to come and to steal a ship, basically. And this is a ritual. This is an old secret society of the Catholic Church that, in my opinion, predates even Adam Weishaupt, because over 100 years before the foundation of the Skull and Bones at Yale University, which was taking from Adam Weishaupt's Illuminati in Germany, which itself was established at 1773. The Skull and Bones in Yale was established later. We can see that they're doing even this sign before that. And so this has a special significance at the Catholic Church. I'm not entirely sure of the ritual it belongs to and what implication it has. But when George Bush, W. Bush, took the Eucharist in the Catholic Church, he had this position with his hand, and the priest deposit the Eucharist directly in his mouth without touching the hand. And I did, when I was a Catholic, someday I arrived at the Catholic Church and went for the Eucharist, wearing a shirt there, a short sleeve shirt, white, completely white, with the skull and bones on it. And when I arrived and put my hand to get the Eucharist, the priest would not give me the Eucharist in my hand. He would be trying to put it directly in my mouth. On my entire life, it was the only time that this happened. So I believe that indeed, this is a sign. This is a secret society that those Jesuits, they know about. So this is the faith, the grand finale of the Jesuits in 1648-49. Those native, they decided to kill the Jesuits, those 8 Jesuits, over a 2-year period. And the folklore in Canada is that they were shot by arrows, brought into their church and burned alive there. There were also the story says that those native, before killing them, they brought them back to the city of Ignatius Loyola in Quebec, in the province of Quebec, as a city after the name of the founder of the Jesuit. And they executed the guys there, proving that those natives were not stupid at all. They knew exactly what they were doing, and they judged them. They decided, they reasoned that it was the only thing to do for reestablishing justice in their time in 1640s. So, but after having seen, what's happened lately during the past week over the findings of native corpse in Jesuit college, in Catholic college, we have every reason to believe that those Catholic Jesuits were maybe killing or sodomizing, fucking the kids of those natives. And of course, back then, many of those natives were pagans. But in comparison to today, they were much more Christian than most people because they wanted justice and freedom, which is two characteristics of the Christian religion. And they knew that it was impossible to settle this problem without killing those murderers and those criminal Jesuits. Here's another image that you can find in the Basilica Marie Reine du Monde on René Lévesque Boulevards in Montreal. This basilique is a replica of the Vatican 4 times smaller that was actually consecrated by John Paul II. And you can see those images there in which we see that those poor martyrs, those Jesuits, were really victims of the natives. Yet, there's no picture of the millions, the tens of millions, over 100 million that died, Protestants that died during the Inquisition of the Catholic Church, led by the same Jesuits in that church. Here's a picture of those 8 Jesuits in front of Sillery's church in Quebec City. We can see the same signs in their name at the bottom of the statue, and they have the logo of the Jesuit in their back, the IHS. So those Jesuits were canonized by, sorry, there's a mistake here. It's not Pius the IX, it's Pius the XI. The same Pope that orchestrated the Second World War with his Cardinal Pacelli, which later became Pius XII. So they were canonized in 1930. Aren't you proud to be a Catholic, to see that Pius the XI, the instigator of the Second World War, who put in power Adolf Hitler, who signed the Lateran Treaty with Mussolini, which gave the order of obedience to his clergy to Adolf Hitler. Aren't you proud to see that the same Pope has canonized those Jesuits? And according to the Roman Catholic Church, they are to be venerated on September the 26th of each year. And according to the Anglican Church, the date is October the 19th. Here's a picture of Brébeuf College in Montreal. Amongst the famous, this is Wikipedia, amongst the famous students of this abominable college, Jesuit college, we can see here under politic, André Boisclair, famous homosexual and raper of men. Just next to him, Robert Bourassa, a former Prime Minister of Quebec, homosexual and pedophile. We can see on the second line, on the right there, Justin Trudeau and his father, former Prime Minister of Canada, Pierre Elliott Trudeau. We can see also under Art et Spectacle, art and entertainment, Xavier Dolan, an absolute insignificant Canadian Quebecer, which is very popular apparently. Julie Snyder, the former wife of Pierre-Carl Pelado, which appears there under politic, which is himself former chief of the Quebec Party. And just beside Julie Snyder, you have Cœur de Pirate, which is the most occult singer in Quebec. Under science, you have billionaire Jean Coutu. You have also famous mathematicians, Hubert Shreve. Under diverse, you get journalist Patrice Roy. You have the former general manager of the Montreal Canadiens, Pierre Boivin, former mayor of Quebec City, Gilles Lamontagne, former hockey player, Georges Larac. Under justice, you have several known justices, including Richard Wagner, the current Chief Supreme Court Justice of the court in Canada. Here we can see Mr. Wagner dressed in Santa Claus or Mother Claus, I guess. Resemble more a dress than anything else. All the judges of the Supreme Court of Canada are dressed like clowns, like that. John Quincy Adams, 6th President of the United States, says this about the Freemasons, and we're going to have the link between the Jesuits and the Freemasons just after a couple of slides. The Freemasons commanding despotically a large portion of the public press, he writes in 1831. He also writes, this nation have Masonic sheriff, juror, and witness betrayed their duty to their country and their God. Administration of the oath is, in its term, contrary to the law of the land. The enter and apprentice obligation is a crime. And the most shocking statement is the last one. This cannot be effected so long as Masonry controls the majority of the state legislature. So the President John Quincy Adams witnessed his country in 1832 being completely infiltrated by those Freemasons. And back then, that was after the murder of William Morgan I spoke about a little earlier. And there were entire political movement back then against the Freemasonry. Not only that, the state of Vermont, we read in one of his letters, was completely anti-Masonic. There was a party there that has a majority that was against Masonry. Today, the Lodge of Freemasonry in Vermont, in Burlington, Vermont, is just beside the office of Bernie Sanders. These quotes can be read in this very good book that I've read, and is available on Amazon, President John Quincy Adams' Quarrel with the Freemasons. They're a collection of letters of Adams concerning Freemasonry. So the United States has always been under this dictatorship and this problem of the Catholic Church infiltrating its political system. Here we see that the Protestant government and country now has 6 Supreme Court justices that are Catholic. So this woman that we see here, Amy Coney Barrett, is also a member of Secret Society of the Catholic Church. The one on the top right there, Brett Kavanaugh, when he was nominated by Jesuit Trump, was accused of having raped several women, and this didn't have any consequences. There's also, of the 9 Supreme Justice, we have 6 here. We have a 7th there that we cannot see because he says he's an Episcopalian, Neil Gorsuch. And basically, Episcopalians are Catholics. And there's one who's a Jew, so the other one, I believe, is also now a Catholic. Here's what Justin Trudeau had to say in 2017 to the Pope. He said, apologize for the residential schools. Same scandal arrived in Australia as well. Here's what he's still saying last week. He's asked for an apology to the Catholic Church. To my opinion, the Pope won't apologize because it's some kind of revenge to the Canadian martyrs, those Jesuit Canadian martyrs that we've seen a little earlier on. Just to pedal back a little bit, to backpedal on the subject of the Pope, here's what the Westminster Confession said in 1647 on chapter 26, article 6. And this article there, it stayed from 1647 until 1903 and was never added back since 1903. There is no other head of the church but the Lord Jesus Christ, nor can the Pope of Rome in any sense be head thereof, but he is that Antichrist, that man of sin and son of perdition, that exalt himself in the church against Christ and all that is called God. We have a little difference between the Westminster Confession of the Anglicans back then and now, haven't we? Here's what one of the bishops of the Anglican Church had to say, Joseph Hall: "There's no peace with Rome." Here's what Pius the IX said in his encyclical letter of August 15, 1854. The absurd and erroneous doctrine or raving in defense of liberty of conscience are the most pestilential error, a pest of all others, most to be dreaded in a state. Gives you an idea of what kind of liberty can be expected when the Pope's reign. Same kind of liberty that we have now under the coronavirus. Same Pope said in his encyclical letter of December 8, 1864, anathematize those who assert the liberty of conscience and of religious worship. Also, he anathematize all such as maintain that the Church may not employ force, a doctrine that the current Pope Francis espouse. Here's what Charles Spurgeon, a famous Baptist preacher, said about Rome. We must have no truce, no treaty with Rome. War to the knife with her. Peace there cannot be. She cannot have peace with us. We cannot have peace with her. I completely agree with this Baptist pastor. Here's what Ellen White had to say, prophet and co-founder of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. The pacific tone of Rome in the United States does not imply change of heart. She is tolerant where she is helpless. Says Bishop O'Connor, religious liberty is merely endure until the opposite can be carried into effect without peril to the Catholic world. The Archbishop of St. Louis once said, heresy and unbelief are crimes. And in Christian countries, now of course he means Catholic, as in Italy and Spain, for instance, where all the people are Catholics and where the Catholic religion is an essential part of the law of the land, they are punished as other crimes. So when the Catholic Church reigns, heresy, which is a very vast definition according to the Catholic Church, it's basically anything that's not Catholic is heresy. Protestantism, liberty of conscience, anything that is not canonical law is heresy, as we've seen in previous statement. And also unbelief meaning atheism, which, I don't support. But if we are not good witness for the Lord, of course people are going to become atheist. And so for them, it's better to fake being Christian than to be an atheist. In God's eye, it's probably even worse to fake being Christian than to be an atheist. Because God comes back in part to destroy the liars. I'm not saying lawyers, I'm saying liars. Josiah Strong, in the book Our Country, has this to say: every cardinal, archbishop, and bishop in the Catholic Church take an oath of allegiance to the Pope in which occur the following words: heretics, schismatic, and rebel to our said Lord the Pope, or his said successor, I will to my utmost persecute and oppose. Ellen White in Great Controversy, page 565-66 says, the Roman Church is far-reaching in her plans and modes of operation. She is employing every device to extend her influence and to increase her power in preparation for the fierce and determined conflict to regain the control of the world, to reestablish persecution, and to undo all that Protestantism has done. We've seen the very last sentence of this, the very last words of this sentence being accomplished through the crisis of the coronavirus, where parliaments has been put onto hold, laws has been replaced with edicts, and the Protestant economy, the middle class, has been destroyed. I'd like to come back for the give you a little history class on the Act of Quebec of 1773 and its absolute importance in the world, for it determined the destiny of the United States. In starting, I'd like to start with presenting or introducing you the General Jeffrey Amherst. This guy was the right-hand man of Wolfe. The General Wolfe would take Quebec. He died. And after the General Amherst, he took the city of Montreal in 1760. Following his victory, the King George III asked him what he would like to have as a prize. And the general said, "I would like to have all the Jesuit estates in the New France." Now the actual king has tried to to have him change his mind and given very good gifts in replacement to those Jesuit estates, but he would not budge, and basically would not receive his prize even before his death, and his succession would not even touch 1 centimeter of the Jesuit estate that he asked. Following the discovery that the Jesuits were actually owner of over 2 million French acre, an hectare, which is basically a little bigger than an English acre. So 2 million hectare was actually discovered to be the possession of the Jesuits in the province of Quebec, namely the island of Laval, which is just north of the island of Montreal, which was named Island Jesus before. A big part of the current land of the Seminary of Quebec, which is just north of Quebec. A big part of Charlesbourg, which is the Très Carré there in Charlesbourg. And Sillery, which is downtown Quebec now. And various lands. Port-Neuf, also a big part of land northwest of Quebec City. And various parts and territories around the St. Lawrence back then. And basically, this General Amherst, he had a street named after him in Montreal, downtown, the sub-city of Outremont, which is just north of downtown Montreal, a very rich and Jewish quarter there, very nice place. And the street Amherst was very well known. It's a nice street where there's many restaurants and commerce, nice little street. And basically in 2017, the former mayor of Montreal, Denis Coderre, a Jesuit Mason, he said that this most illustrious general of the British Army back then, he said that he was a killer of Native Amerindians because he invented some kind of story that he was a killer of natives, basically. And because of that, they needed to replace the name of the street to some other name, which is a complete lie and is very insulting to the memory of that man, that great English-Canadian general. So to come back to a little story about the Act of Quebec, basically after the taking of the English, the economy of Quebec, the province of Quebec today, flourished because back then, before in the 1750s, when the English took Quebec City, was the first city that they took, and that led to eventually the conquest of Montreal, and after that they had the entire province. The French, because of the Jesuit rules that was going on in Quebec, in the New France they call it, that the economy was stagnant. They could not raise the population over 200 people for over 100 years. They tried a lot of things. They brought prostitutes here for the population because there was not enough nativity. There were a lot of different rules that you cannot do. For example, you cannot give birth to a horse. It needed to be a horse that was imported from France. You know, a lot of rules. Like when you see a society drowning in rules and laws, it's because the Jesuits are in control. And people also realize that the several Protestant arm are saying that the Jesuits have perfected the communism in the reduction in the South America, and it's true. But when analyzing what happened in Quebec, and I've read many books about the economy, or what was happening in Quebec City back then. We're talking about only 200 people here. Really, the communism has not been perfected in the reductions. It's my opinion that the communism is only the implementation of canon law. It's what it does, and it means a stagnant society. It means high mortality rate, dead economy. It means that the commerce is completely controlled by the state. It means no liberty, and a court of the king that possesses everything. And basically, if you even study the system where how they were establishing people back then, the 1660s and 70s, basically they brought in slaves. This was they had the people were given land, and they were under obligation to give the majority of what they were producing to the seigneur, the lord of the place, and it was communism because everything was shared. For example, they had a wheat mill for the entire community, and the lord was the possessor of that mill. And to use it, because you were not allowed to build any other mill, you had to. So you were obliged, if you had a harvest, you were obliged to do business with the mill of the lord. And so, nobody owned anything, and it was slavery, basically. But it's not called slavery. When you analyze the system, it's really what it is. And so if you read the story of Quebec City, which was pretty well written about of the history about the Jesuits, where they're described as supermen and super people, hard workers, and Christians and all that, which is a lie. A part of that, the story of the Quebec City is real, and we see that the Catholic system just bring poverty. And also, I can witness myself that for the past 30 or 40 years, the province of Quebec, which is the only so-called Catholic province in Canada, was always the poor child of the country because of the Catholic system. And even people in the radio and journals and TV, they were blaming the Catholic mentality for this poverty, which is real. This is a real. And it's really the implementation of the common good, the desire of the government to decide for the people, the absence, complete eradication of freedom and individualism really leads to this, is a description of the Catholic system and the implementation of the canon law. So, Napoleon Bonaparte, he legalized the Jesuits in 1764 in France. The movement to annihilate the Jesuits started in 1559 in Spain, where it was the first country, and there's an interesting story, and I won't enter into this, about this in Spain, where they banned the Jesuits after the emissary of the Pope said that they were doing something real bad in Spain, and the king was feeling the menace of the Jesuit, and his power was under fire because of the Jesuits, and they basically started this movement to eliminate the Jesuits in Europe. And over 10 countries in Europe would ban the Jesuits in the 1760s. And even when you count the entire Europe nearly expelled the Jesuits, even Mexico expelled the Jesuits, and they were forced to renounce their vows, otherwise they would be executed or banished from the country. And so this is real. The Jesuits were expelled from over 80 countries around the world. And so Napoleon decided to banish it. And another pope, the Pope Clement XIV, he banned the entire Jesuit because the movement was so strong in Europe. He was obliged to ban the Jesuit in 1769. Now he would be killed a couple of weeks after. And eventually the Jesuit will be reestablished in 1814 by Pius III in the Congress of Vienna. So the Catholic Church, just to give you an idea, so in 1769, the Pope bans the Jesuit. In Canada, it was not banned, though. There's an interesting story about that. There's another book I've read about that. Don't remember the title there, but it gives the story about what the Jesuit did. They were obliged to stay here. No other Jesuit were permitted to enter Canada. And to my opinion, because it was not completely banned in Canada as it was elsewhere, particularly not in Quebec, it created a lot of discontent, not only in Quebec, but most likely in English Canada, which were all Protestant in America. And the Act of Quebec of 1773 took hold. And the Act of Quebec was basically, there were a lot of things there on there. Basically, the King George III basically decided to give the system to the province of Quebec. He gave back the old French system they had before. And now I won't enter into all the implication of that, but basically the main edict that was done in 1773 was to legalize Catholicism, because it was illegal before, as we've seen the terrible persecution and death that was going on in Europe, where millions of people fled to America, mainly in the United States, but also in Canada and elsewhere in the world, namely South Africa, Australia, New Zealand. And yeah, so that was a big thing back then. And the Americans, they decided because of that, you see, they've seen those Americans, those Puritans and all that, they've seen the terrible foe of Catholicism in England and elsewhere in Europe. And they decided to come here and to establish something based on Christianity. And they didn't want any Catholic there. And when they seen that there was suddenly, just north of their border, a Catholic nation being implemented by supposed Protestant George III, they decided to take their arm and to invade Quebec in 1775. And the Americans would invade the entirety of the province of Quebec in that year. And after the winter, the troops from England would come back, and the Americans were eventually pushed back to America. And after that, the American decided to declare the war against England and to create their own country. And so, when we're talking about the Act of Quebec, yes, it's the reestablishment of the Catholicism, the Catholic religion in Canada, but it's really the heart of the American Revolution. It all started with the Act of Quebec. And I myself, before COVID, when you were walking downtown old Quebec City, many of the tourists there were Americans from Maine and Vermont, place where the Americans would come by car. And I would sometimes speak to those Americans, and they would tell me, "Do you know that we invaded the country in 1775?" I said, "What?" Yeah, and they all visiting the Citadel because they want to know what helped the British troops. What marvel was that Citadel in Quebec City? So it's a very famous tourist attraction, particularly for Americans. So I wanted to tell when General Amherst, we see that the Americans were sure that George III was a Jesuit or controlled by the Jesuits, and we know that what the consequence of Jesuitism is. We've read the oath a little earlier on. And so when Abraham Lincoln was killed in 1835 by this man, John Wilkes Booth, it's important to remember that this guy was member of the Knights of the Golden Circle, a Catholic secret society, and that, according to Burke McCarthy, in her book, The Suppressed Truth About the Assassination of Lincoln, in which she states that Georgetown University, a Jesuit university in Washington, D.C., was basically running the trial of John Wilkes Booth. which led to his short imprisonment and liberation afterwards. Contrary to the mother of John Wilkes Booth, who was hung along with the other traitors that perpetrated the conspiracy against Lincoln in 1865. Now, I talked a little earlier about, the Americans, what they have to say about the reestablishment of the Jesuits. We see that in a letter to Jefferson, John Adams said, "I do not like the reappearance of the Jesuit. If ever there was a body of men who merited eternal damnation on earth and in hell, it is this Society of Jesus." And Jefferson would answer, "Like you, I disapprove the restoration of the Jesuit, for it means a step backward from light into darkness." This is the book that I referred to in the presentation. There are other books also that have been put that are very interesting about Protestantism in the province of Quebec. But this is the story of the General Amherst and the Jesuit estate question, which actually nearly lasted 100 years, can you believe? And the agitation of 1889 was basically a big riot against the Jesuit in Quebec City. And it was the biggest riot until the G7 meeting in 2003, I think, around there. And here's the former mayor of Montreal, Jesuit Mason Denis Coderre, former Liberal Party member. He says, "General Amherst, he needs to go out." He means, of course, the name of the nice street that he had after his name. This most venerable and reasonable and patriotic British general, the General Jeffrey Amherst. A lover of Indians and a killer of Jesuits. And as we've seen in the presentation, the Jesuits are the real killer of the native, not the English. Here's what Helena Blavatsky, 33rd degree Freemason, has to say about the Jesuits. Helena Blavatsky has even a lodge after her, named after her name, because she's such an important figure in the Masonic religion. Yes, religion. It is curious to note, too, that most of the bodies which work these, such as ancient and accepted Scottish rite, the rite of Avignon. Now, Avignon is an interesting name in itself because Avignon is a city in Provence, France, in the regions of Provence, southern France, where the Pope was displaced there for a couple of years in Avignon, and he had a palace there because the Italians, they could not endure the persecution and the killing that the Pope would do to Christians that were not Catholics back then. And so she's talking about different orders, and she says, "Are nearly all the offsprings of the son of Ignatius Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits." And then she quote, "Baron Hunt, Chevalier Ramsay, and others worked under the instructions of the general of the Jesuits." Isis Unveiled, page 390. In this website, which is her Theosophy, we can see that Blavatsky says the following: "The Jesuits have practiced not only occultism, but black magic in its worst form, more than any other body of men, and to it they owed in large measure their power and influence." Now, when we're talking about black magic, what is black magic? Well, Aleister Crowley, 33rd degree Freemason, describes to us in his book Magics in Theory and Practice, page 95, what magics is. And magics is human sacrifice, preferably young male humans and virgin, in order to harvest the energy of the man or the animal that is sacrificed. This is also called satanic ritual abuse. Now, Helena Blavatsky and Aleister Crowley refers in the starting page of this book, La Messe et ses mystères de mythe, the Mass and its mystery in English. Both Aleister Crowley and Helena Blavatsky are pointing to Jean-Marie Ragon as being a Mason that everyone needs to read. Now, Jean-Marie Ragon was a French 33rd degree Freemason. And in his book, La Messe et ses mystères, The Mass and its Mystery, it says that basically the Catholic Church basically is duplicating the rituals of the old pagan Babylonian religions. And Jean-Marie Ragon also says that the letter G at the center of the logo of the blazing star signifies the general of the Jesuits. Not only that, but this book is very interesting because it's the flip side of a famous book by Alexander Hyssop named The Two Babylons, in which this Protestant pastor from the 1600s compares the Catholic system and the Catholic rites with the rites of Babylon, and it's very similar. Here you have a Mason who says essentially the same. So now we're about to end this presentation, and I'd like you to go and have a look at this Wikipedia page, where we can see that for the past 20 years, there were thousands of priests that were caught into sexual abuse and sodomy and all that, preferably always boys from the Catholic Church. And this last week we had another example of the satanic power that leads this most extraordinary achievement of Satan on this planet, the Catholic Church. So those Canadian martyrs, Jesuit priests and coadjutors, were killed in 1648-49. And the account is from the Catholic Church, of course, that those Iroquois, which is a native tribe there in Canada here, that they brought those Jesuits into the town of Ignatius Loyola, and they shot with arrow the priest, brought them into their church, and burned them alive. And we have an account here. We can see the paintings that the Catholic historian depict of what happened to the supposed Canadian martyrs, Jesuit martyrs. Now, in the light of what we seen last week, we can ask ourselves the legitimate question: was those natives, were they justified doing what they did? And my answer is yes. It is reasonable, according to this presentation, to believe that the Jesuits have always been the same and have never changed. And even before and after, there were controversy about their very existence, that the order was annihilated even by a pope, that kings decided to unify against the Jesuits. And for many years, decades, this most evil order was outlawed in Europe and many other countries around the world. And as we've seen today, that even the presidents of the United States knew what a Jesuit was. So when time comes for your kids to study the story of the Canadian martyrs, I implore you to give them a flip side story about those criminal pedophiles that are fucking children around the world over the past centuries. And if you are scandalized by the words that I just used, are you as much scandalized of the action that were done by this satanic church? It's maybe time to reconsider your faith. In Revelation 17:5 it says, and upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery Babylon, the great mother of harlots and the abomination of the world. Can we not recognize the same vocabulary than Jean-Marie Ragon in The Mass and its Mystery? Mystery, Babylon the Great. Babylon is the Catholic Church. The beast that you saw was, and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pits and go into perdition. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose name was not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they were behold the beast that was and is not and yet is. The beast from the bottomless pit is the spiritualism that was invented or repeated by the Jesuits and the Freemasons and so forth. Spiritualism is the beast from the bottomless pit. Revelation 17:12. And the 10 horn which you saw are 10 kings which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as king 1 hour with the beast. This is a future prophecy, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in another presentation. These have one mind and shall give their power into the strength unto the beast. We're talking about the Pope here. The beast is the Pope. And the 10 horn which you saw upon the beast, that shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. This is again a future prophecy. I'm most interested to see what it's going to look like. And the woman which you saw is the great city which reign over the kings of the earth. So this is the Vatican, or Rome. Revelation 18:2. And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen, is become a habitation of devils, and the hole of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean birds. What other than a Catholic Church can be called a habitation of devils? I mean, if you, not even being Catholic or Christian, would say, what kind of institution do you believe is a habitation of devils? Just based on the fact, anyone reasonable and informed would say the Catholic Church. Revelation 18:3. For all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. Sodomizing kids. And the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth has watched rich through the abundance of her delicacies. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out over my people, that you may not be partakers of our sin, and that you receive not of her plagues. For her sins have reached unto heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Reward her even as she rewarded you, and double unto her double according to her works. And in the cup which she had filled her double, how much she had glorified herself and lived deliciously. So much torment and sorrow give her, for she says in her heart, I sit as queen, I'm no widow, and I shall see no sorrow. Can you not imagine the Pope Francis saying that when Trudeau, the Jesuit, is saying him, apologize? He's probably saying, I sit as queen, I'm no widow, I will see no sorrow. Therefore shall her plague come in one day, and mourning and famine, and she shall be utterly burned with fire, for strong is the Lord who judges her. And the kings of the earth who have come in fornication with, live deliciously with her, shall bewail her and lament for her, when she shall see the smoke of her burning, standing afar off from fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, the great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour thy judgment come. And the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buy her merchandise anymore, and the merchandise of gold, silver, precious stone, and so forth. And look at what's written in Revelation 18:13. And slaves and souls of men. Is it not exactly what's going on right now? Can you not think about Jeffrey Epstein and all the sexual perversion and everything that I just denounced in this presentation here, just in that city, in that sentence? And the fruit of thy soul lusted after departed from thee, and all things which were dainty and goodly are departed from thee, and thou shalt find them no more at all. The merchants of these things were made rich by her, shall stand afar off for the fear of her torment, weeping and wailing, and saying, Alas, alas, the great city that was clothed in fine linen, and purple and scarlet, and decked with gold, and precious stones and pearl. So it says here, purple and scarlet, the exact color of the College of Cardinal and the bishops. Here we got the Council of Inclusive Capitalism, and every company that is a member of that. So we got MasterCard, Alliance, Salesforce, DuPont, various unions, United Nations, Ernst & Young, Merck's, the pharmaceutical company, Estee Lauder, the beauty products, CalPERS, the Union, Johnson & Johnson, Visa, Estee Lauder, BP, State of California, Bank of America, Guardian Life Insurance, State Street, Rockefeller Foundation, Keurig, Ford, and the most interesting here, Saudi Aramco, the largest petroleum company in the world, possessed by the King of Saudi Arabia. And how does Merriam-Webster define terrorism? A systematic use of terror, especially as mean of coercion. So the Catholic Church is a terrorist organization, a pedophilic, criminal, homosexual, Satan worshipper, satanic organization. It is a terrorist organization that the native had found the only way of dealing with, that is, with what John Knox called the sword of just defense. The only way to stop the Catholic Church, we've seen in the book of Revelation, is to burn her with fire and to give her double what she gave us. And many, many people were sexually abused in Quebec here, in Canada, in the US, in everywhere in the world, in Australia, in Europe, everywhere. And so, guys, help me out here. We need to have this word out. We need to make sure that the people understand that this is a terrorist criminal organization, that those priests that disguise as Christians, but they're nothing more than militia of the Pope who's trying to give back the power that he lost in 1798, the Pope that is, and that the people want him back. Those fundamentalist Catholic, they want him back. So on that, God bless you. See you next time.